I really appreciate that. Arnold, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chief Bellegarde, for being here today. It's a real privilege to be able to question a guy like you, so it's really appreciate you coming out. You mentioned in your report fundamental human rights, and I would assume that the most fundamental human right is the right to life. And as you know, there's a special joint committee studying physician-assisted suicide. Well, they've been doing that for the last 2 months. They're about to bring out their report on this, and I'm alarmed by the lack of First Nation engagement on this as well. It appears that the committee only heard from 2 Indigenous witnesses. Dr. Lafontaine is the president of the Indigenous Physicians Association of Canada, and he highlighted in his presentation, he said, and I quote, "I feel obligated to identify the absence of major national Indigenous organizations. I feel that there has not been meaningful consultations with Indigenous peoples." End quote. Was the Assembly of First Nations invited to present at this joint committee on physician-assisted dying?
The answer is no, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
The issue is lack of capacity. And a lot of times, capacity. You know, as an organization, we've been gutted in the last 10 years. So we don't have the capacity to respond to all these important issues in a very meaningful, effective way.
Do you feel that First Nations were like we had two people?
Oh, it's weak, obviously.
Yeah.
It's obviously weak,
yeah.
You know. And again, it comes back to capacity a lot of times, in a lot of instances. It's not that it's not an issue, it's just capacity a lot of times comes into play.
Have you consulted with among over the 600 reserves represented by the AFN? Have you consulted at all on this issue?
Not at all.
Not at all.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's something that has to get done because it is a huge issue, the fundamental right to life, and again, it's a capacity issue. Like we're getting ready for the environmental meetings coming up on, you know, so that we're focusing energy on that, and then the First Ministers Conference coming up in July, and then it's basically a capacity issue. But so the answer is no, we have not been involved or consulted adequately.
Both of the Indigenous witnesses that came there highlighted other important areas of concern, noting that Indigenous peoples have the highest rates of suicide in Canada, with Indigenous young women at nearly 8 times the national average. Dr. Lafontaine expressed alarm that these consultations of the government may be ignoring the largest potential demographic that is eligible to pursue this service. Can you speak to any concerns that the AFN may have in regards to preventing suicide and the impact of legalizing assisted suicide?
The whole issue is mental health. You know, in terms of when you look at holistic health, you think of mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, 4 quadrants to an individual's being, and they all have to be in balance. Mental health is a huge issue, and there's not enough adequate resources. The suicide rate is high amongst the Inuit, it's high amongst our youth, and it really has to be addressed. Where are the resources, the adequate resources to deal with this? So dealing with mental health issues and having a national suicide preventative strategy has to be put forward, and there has to be both the human and financial resources in place to deal with this, because it's epidemic amongst our territories and communities.
Thank you. One of the things that was talked about at this committee hearing was the use of palliative care, and I think you just addressed that a little bit, the 4 areas of life: the spiritual, the psychological, the physical health of these communities. What is it like in the Indigenous world, like the incorporation of the entire family into the beginning of life and the end of life decisions that are made within the Indigenous community?
It's a really deep question.
Yeah.
How long do you want me to get into it?
You got 45 seconds.
It's again, wellness, child rearing. We have different sections from birth, you know, like the quadrants again.
Yeah.
You know, 0 to 25 or 0. You have adolescents and teens. It's a whole cycle. And historically, we had child rearing practices and ways of raising children, and the children are gifts from the Creator. And the role of the grandparents was huge and key in raising the family as a unit. You know, so everything's been displaced.
Well, perhaps I can join you and Don for coffee and we can continue this conversation.
This is, yeah, I wish I could be more brevity, but these are such deep questions I can't answer in 20 seconds. It's going to take a little longer sometimes. I apologize, Chair.
Thank you.
Good. I appreciate the depth of the question, though. That was great.